Welcome in. Week 17 is in the books. The playoffs are here. This weekend, we got the Titans and the Chiefs. We got the Falcons and the Rams. We got the Bills and the Jaguars. And we got the Panthers and the Saints. But we're not going to talk about those things right off the bat. It's the MMQB podcast with Albert Breer. You guys are watching me on YouTube. You guys could be listening to me on iTunes. And we got you up here on Periscope. We're going to answer all of your questions. Obviously, this is a playoff week. Big playoff games this weekend for 8 fan bases. That's a quarter of the league participating in the playoffs this weekend. But I wanted to kick things off by talking about what everybody's talking about this time of year and the couple days after the season, and that's the coaching carousel. Update you guys on what I'm hearing in each of these places. I count 6 coaching openings, maybe a 7th, and then 2 open general manager situations. And I'm going to start with something I just saw on Twitter, which is beyond classic and makes me love Jon Gruden. This is courtesy of Jerry McDonald of the Bay Area News Group, I believe it is. Works for the Oakland paper, has for a long time. And Jerry, who's got a long-standing relationship with Jon Gruden, called him up and asked him about the Raider job. And Jon Gruden's answer was about as fantastic an answer as he could possibly give. He didn't deny it. He didn't confirm it. He just said, I think I am being considered, yes. I have so much respect for that answer. Like, just imagine, like, on one hand, you're over here, you're asking for a piece of the freaking team, which is unprecedented. You are making an unprecedented ask to come back to the NFL. And then you're telling a reporter, yeah, I think that they're considering me. I think they're looking at me. As in considering giving you a piece of ownership? As in considering making you the highest paid coach in the history of the sport? Maybe the highest paid coach in the history of sports? Maybe they're considering you being the grand marshal of the 2-year parade they're about to have to Las Vegas? Just awesome stuff. Awesome stuff. So much respect for Jon Gruden. We'll get to the Oakland Raiders situation here in a minute. So what I want to do now is I'm going to go through the 6 coaching openings. Then we'll hit the 7th, which is the maybe that's still out there. Then the 2 GM jobs. Then I'm going to answer all of your questions up on Periscope. And we're going to start right here in New York with the Giants. Their process is obviously underway. They were able to hit the ground running because they fired their coach and their general manager in early December. They've got a new general manager in place, and Dave Gettleman. And they're going through the process now. They've put a few slips out. They've asked for permission to interview both the Patriot coordinators, Josh McDaniels and Matt Patricia. They have certainly been connected to Jim Schwartz, the Eagles defensive coordinator, over the last few weeks. And I think Bill O'Brien would be somebody who would be in play there as well. And here's where I'm going to explain why it's a little difficult this time around for the Giants. They have typically leaned towards people that they know. Their 2 best coaching hires of the last 40 years were, in effect, in-house hires. Bill Parcells was the linebackers coach there, I believe, in the late 70s. And then the defensive coordinator became the head coach. And Tom Coughlin had been the receivers coach in the late 80s, came back in 2004 to become the head coach of the team after spending almost a decade in Jacksonville, getting an expansion franchise off the ground. So the trouble here is that I don't know if there's a logical candidate that can be connected to them and that they have past history with. Now, you could point to Nick Saban. You could point to Bill Belichick, and that those would be the ideal candidates, but let's assume they're not available. If Bill Belichick and Nick Saban aren't available, well, you've got guys who I think could be a personality fit. You've got guys who've got head coaching experience, and you've got guys who have connections to them. And so I'm going to break down what I think the 4 guys that I mentioned have going for them. Okay? Josh McDaniels was a head coach, has a connection to Bill Belichick. That's going to be a theme here. And Bill Belichick certainly has the ear of the Mara family. And he's an offensive coach. And so because you've got the 2nd overall pick, because you've got a decision to make on Eli Manning, I think that one works. The issue there, of course, is, well, is he going to be okay working with a general manager who's already in place and Dave Gettleman? That's a fair question to ask, and how do those two mesh? And that's going to be a question that they'll answer in the interview. And then, there isn't a real connection to the organization. Number 2, Matt Patricia, the defensive coordinator of the Patriots. I believe he does have support in that building, that Matt does have support of some of the people that are running the search. And I don't think that this is a courtesy interview. I also think that Bill Belichick would support him the same way he'd support Josh. I think the other thing about Matt is that he'll be willing to fit in to the culture. And one of the things that you hear about the Giants is that they don't fit you, you have to fit them. And so I think to some degree Matt would be a little bit more just kind of a soldier and a piece of the army there. And so I could see I think Patricia's a serious consideration there. Jim Schwartz, again, connection to Belichick. I think that helps. Previous head coaching experience, I think that helps too. But he's a very forceful personality. Very intelligent, but very forceful personality. And so the question becomes, do you think he's going to fit you rather than you having to fit him? And then 4th, Bill O'Brien, who I think would probably be the leader in the clubhouse for this job if he was available. Would you pick up the phone and call the Texans and offer a draft pick? He's got the offensive history. He's got the work with quarterbacks when you're going to have to draft one potentially and make a decision on another one, and Eli Manning. He's obviously been a head coach in 2 places. So the interesting thing about the Giants search is that there isn't an easy answer here. And so this one isn't in the bag like a lot of people felt like the GM search was in the bag because Dave Gettleman was available. Number 2, the Oakland Raiders. I don't think we need to spend a lot of time here. This is going to be Jon Gruden. The expectation, at least, is that it's going to be Jon Gruden. I'm going to give you 3 reasons why Jon Gruden, why this is the year for Jon Gruden. Okay. Number 1, he is not as happy in the booth as he has been in the past, and I think that is absolutely positively a factor here. That it just hasn't worked out the same way with Sean McDonough that it did with Mike Tirico. So I think that that's absolutely a factor. Number 2, his youngest is graduating high school, and I think that's a factor. Anybody who has kids knows. Now he's going to have a lot more free time on his hands, and so that's a factor. And number 3, the 2 jobs that the 2 places he had history with, and the 2 ownership groups that he knew intimately were pursuing him, and so there was a level of certainty there for him with the Bucs and the Raiders. Now, what I can tell you additionally, as a result of all of that, he's been lining up staff for a few weeks. He's been talking to his old coaching friends for a few weeks about this. Not always a sure sign that you're coming back, but it does mean that you've done what you need to do to return if you want to return. And so I think Gruden's coming back. I think he's going to come back with the Raiders. I don't think there's any secret. I'm not breaking any news here. There's no leap there. I think it's a good fit. And the other tidbit I give you on that is I think one thing that probably pushed him towards Oakland over Tampa, outside of the fact that what Oakland is ready to offer the moon and the stars and the sun, right? Outside of that, there's also the Derek Carr factor, which is a factor here. Jon Gruden, and we're going to write a little bit more about this later in the week, Jon Gruden advocated for Derek Carr to Mark Davis in 2014. In fact, Mark Davis was pushing the football people there to take Derek Carr 4th overall because of what Gruden had told him. And so Gruden was a huge advocate in 2014 of Derek Carr. And so I think the presence of Derek Carr in Oakland is a factor. Not that he doesn't like Jameis Winston, but I know how strong he was on Derek Carr. And so if there's one little thing that maybe put him over the top, I think it's the presence of the quarterback there. Also, that's a team that's ready to win. I mean, they won 12 games a year ago. Okay, number 3, Detroit. The Lions, I think you're going to hear, or you have heard already, that there have been Patriot-connected assistants that have been in line there, and there have been defensive names that have been in line there. Steve Wilkes, the defensive coordinator from Carolina, is one name you've heard. Mike Vrabel, the defensive coordinator in Houston, is another name you've heard. And then there's Matt Patricia, the defensive coordinator with the Patriots, who I think would be the front runner right now if he doesn't get the job with the Giants. And so think that that's and again, they fired a coach with a winning record. And I think the reason why is because if Bob Quinn carries Jim Caldwell into 2017, then both their asses are on the line, because that's year 3 then for Quinn. And so then if they fail in 2017, Quinn's doing it with somebody else's coach and without the opportunity to hire his own coach. So those are the sorts of things that you have to think about. And the opening was there for Quinn to go get his own guy. And I don't think it was anything against Jim Caldwell. But it's an opportunity to go get your own guy and align the organization the way you've probably envisioned aligning an organization since you first dreamed of getting a general manager job. And so that's what Quinn's taken the opportunity to do here. And having worked in the New England building, I think Quinn feels like, at least the word on the street is, feels like Patricia's the guy who lines up with him philosophically. And what Patricia would also allow them to do is keep that well-regarded offensive staff in place, particular the offensive coordinator, Jim Bob Cooter, and the quarterback's coach, Brian Callahan, both of whom have strong relationships with Matthew Stafford. And remember, Jim Bob Cooter has some loose ties to the Patriot organization as well, or at least that family of offensive coaches. He coached for Adam Gase, who coached for Josh McDaniels. So there's a little bit of a connection there. Number 4, Indianapolis. This is, to me, the kind of wild card among all the jobs, because there are going to be some candidates who are going to go in there who could have options. Josh McDaniels primary among them, and they're going to want to know about Andrew Luck's health. And so the question then becomes, can you convince a coach who's got options that Andrew Luck is going to be healthy in 2018 and is going to be healthy going forward? Because if he is, that's a damn good job. You've got a transcendent quarterback talent then, assuming he can get back to where he was. A transcendent quarterback talent and one of the most respected talent evaluators in the NFL a year in Chris Ballard, a year into his rebuilding project. And that's why I think if they can sell him on it, that's why I think Josh McDaniels might be the fit in Indianapolis. And Josh McDaniels might be the fit to get the most out of Andrew Luck. Again, I think Josh McDaniels is the number 1 coach in the market right now, and I think there's a good chance he's going to have options. But if Andrew Luck's healthy, you got Chris Ballard there, and you're going to have an ability to hire your own staff, I think that'd be a tough one for Josh McDaniels to turn down. Number 5, the Chicago Bears. And this one sort of swings on what you think about Mitch Trubisky, how good the job is. But Ryan Pace has done a nice job putting some young talent on the roster. They're clearly not there yet, but has put some young talent on the roster over his first 3 years there. And so, from what I understand, they're going to be looking for somebody who can work with Mitch Trubisky and who can help give the offense some juice. Now, they've gone back and forth on this a little bit. They had defensive head coach in Lovie Smith, fired him. They go with the offensive genius in Mark Trestman, fire him, go back to the defensive coach who's more of a program builder type, and John Fox, fire John Fox. Now they're going back to the offensive guru. So 3 guys that are already in the mix, already will be interviewed there. McDaniels, John DeFilippo, the quarterback's coach from the Eagles, and Pat Shurmur, the offensive coordinator from the Vikings. All 3 of those guys very, very legitimate candidates. Shurmur's name has been connected to that spot for quite some time. He has experience as a head coach. I think he's a serious candidate there, as are the other 2. I think ultimately those 3 names, I think there's a reason why you heard those 3 names first. I think all 3 of those guys are very serious candidates there. And I think how the interviews go could determine what they wind up doing. And a little bit of a wild card there would be Pete Carmichael, the offensive coordinator in New Orleans for the last decade, who worked with Ryan Pace in New Orleans. Okay, number 6, Arizona. To me, this is the most wide open one of all of them. I mean, I could see this going to Todd Haley, the Steelers offensive coordinator. I could see this going to Mike Vrabel. Now, he's going to interview in Detroit and Indianapolis. Very well regarded as a program builder, as a leader. Mike Vrabel, I think, would be a good landing spot for him. But this is truly a wide open search. I don't think it matters what side of the ball. I don't think level of experience matters. I don't think there's a prototype they're looking for. I think they're going into this wide open with the idea we could wind up with a 30-something. We could wind up with a 60-something. And they showed 4 years ago they were willing to think outside the box with Bruce Arians. 5 years ago? 5 years ago. They were willing to think outside the box, hiring an older coach and Bruce Arians. And I can tell you the number one guy on their list last year was Sean McVay. And that's not revisionist history because I heard that this time, not last year. And so they were willing to go ultra young. They were also willing to go old. Again, I think this is wide open. I do think that the idea of McVay gives you a little bit of a window into the way that they were thinking then, and those guys are still all in place. Obviously, Michael Bidwell runs the franchise. Steve Keim, the general manager, Mike Disner, Terry McDonough, those guys, all the power brokers are still in place. And so I certainly think that that's a wide open search. Okay, number 7 are maybe Cincinnati. This one could go either way. I know the coaches are in the dark about what Marvin Lewis is going to do. By the time you listen to this, he may have made up his mind. I know he's supposed to address it again on Wednesday. If there is a change here, and I'm not convinced there's going to be a change there, then I think a call goes into Cleveland about Hugh Jackson. I think a call goes to Washington about Jay Gruden. I think they look at Darren Simmons and Jay Gruden the same, or Darren Simmons and Paul Guenther. The same way we said the Giants like to go with what they know, the Bengals like to go with what they know. And so my belief is that they would probably look first in-house or guys who have experience in-house because it's a different type of organization. And one thing you hear is they could be expanding their scouting operation, which tells me maybe there are some concessions being made to keep Marvin. It's worth keeping an eye on anyway, whether or not there are certain concessions. And one thing they fought over for years is whether or not they're going to build an indoor facility. That'd be another thing that would be a concession there. But it's an interesting one going forward. And how the organization changes coming out of this will be interesting going forward. The one thing that complicates a lot of things here is that his contract's up. Marvin's contract's up. And so they would have to do some sort of deal. That would mean you're renewing vows to some degree. I doubt that they would do a 2-year deal or a 1-year deal. You would think in this situation that they would want to re-up for a while. And so that's what complicates this a little bit. The same way the Colts situation a couple years ago was complicated because Chuck Pagano's contract had run out. And they wound up giving him a 4-year deal. Now, 2 years later, they're going to have to pay out the final 2 years of his deal. Okay, 8 and 9, these are GM situations, openings. Houston is number 8 for us. The meetings have been ongoing this week. They are still ongoing. I would expect some structural changes in Houston in the way the organization works. I would expect that there will be some sort of personnel chief coming in with a connection to Bill O'Brien. I would expect that there's going to be a focus on organizational alignment. And I think the key here in holding this thing together through all of this, and they've been through a lot the last few weeks, has been the quarterback and Deshaun Watson. And I think Deshaun Watson's presence makes this an attractive job to potential general manager candidates, no matter how the job is set up. It's probably not going to be set up the same way it was when Rick Smith was there. And so you got a really good head coach there who would be the number one guy in the market easily, or easily is unfair, but would be the number one guy in the market if he were available. You have a young quarterback going into his second year. You've got big-time defensive pieces. It's a good job, even though it might not be a true GM job in that you have power of everything. And then the other one is Green Bay. And Green Bay to me is fascinating. Here's why. This is a pivotal offseason for them. Aaron Rodgers turned 34 a month ago. That's how old Brett Favre was going into the 2004 season. The following year, the team drafted Aaron Rodgers. So that sort of tells you where they're at right now. They're right in that window where maybe they could be drafting a quarterback to succeed Aaron Rodgers in April. They're right in that window where they've got to start worrying about his longevity. They're right in that window where opportunities aren't limitless. You know, I remember being on the field after the Super Bowl in 2010 and talking to Aaron's family, and I remember it seemed like the beginning of something really big, and the potential there was limitless. Well, they haven't been to the Super Bowl since. And so there's pressure on a lot of people to get a lot of things right. The first thing they're going to need to get right is the GM position, the GM hire. And there are some things at work there. Russ Ball, I'd say right now, is the favorite. He's the cap guy there. He's got the trust of the executive board there. But if you hire Russ Ball, do you alienate some of your scouts? Some of your scouts who've interviewed for GM jobs. And so Brian Gutekunst, Elliott Wolf, Alonzo Highsmith, those guys are going to be considered, but if they don't get the job, what does that do to your scouting department? And are there people looking to get out of there? We already know Alonzo's looking at potentially a somewhat lateral move to Cleveland. Could we see more of that? There were rumors out there that Elliott Wolf could go to the Giants as Gettleman's number 2. Would that be on the table if he doesn't get the Green Bay GM job? Will they make a run at John Schneider? There's a lot of questions there. And a lot of guys who have connections to that organization, guys in that building. It's a complicated dynamic. And then you've got Mike McCarthy going into a contract year. You've got a defensive coordinator hire that needs to be made. And you've got Aaron Rodgers' contract, which needs to be redone. There's a lot going on there. And a lot of the decisions that we see made over the next year in Green Bay will determine whether or not Aaron Rodgers gets back to where I think we all believe he belongs, which is on that Super Bowl stage. It's a shame we haven't seen him there in 7 years. And it's hard to get there. I think Mike McCarthy's done a good job. They've been in contention year after year after year. But these things have a way of putting pressure on people and putting pressure on an organization. And I think that there's a lot of pressure on the Packers right now to get these decisions right so they can maximize what's left of the championship window for Aaron Rodgers, now 34 years old. All right, I'll answer your questions on Periscope now. Let's go through them. I'll get them rapid fire. We'll do this for about 5 minutes or so, as usual. Will 9 Lives Marvin Lewis now stay in Cincinnati playing spoiler? An owner is too cheap to find a rehire. Well, if the owner is being cheap, he'll let Marvin go, because if he's going to bring Marvin back, he's going to have to do a new contract with him, which means committing to him long term. Who would replace Patricia as DC in New England? I think it's Brian Flores without question. There are people who believe Brian Flores might be the best future head coach on that staff. Jimmy G's contract situation has been complicated a little by his great play. No question about it. They're not going to be able to put the non-exclusive tag on him anymore. They're going to have to put the exclusive tag on him now. That means the tag number goes from about $23.5 million to probably $26 million. So now your leverage point changes if you're Jimmy. Jimmy's looking at a contract on paper that should be worth close to $30 million a year if he pushes it with his leverage, and the Niners have the space to do it. Who wins the NFC? I don't know if I'm ready to make my pick yet, and I think they may be asking us to do it on the site here this week. I'm going to go with the Saints. What is the percentage on Belichick leaving? Let's put it at 10%. Who should replace Jon Gruden in the Monday Night Football booth? It's a great question. I like Bruce Arians as like a potential, like I just think Bruce has got a little something to him, like a little edge to him. And what I like about the idea of putting Bruce Arians in the booth, and I know he's got an interest in doing media, is like he knows he's not going back into coaching, so he doesn't have to give a shit about anyone. And that, like his edge, like his just kind of like elbows, the way he's always been. You add that to the fact that he doesn't need to worry about pissing other people off. I think he could be dynamite in the booth. So Bruce Arians, there you go. There's some free advice for ESPN. Pair Bruce Arians with Sean McDonough. Other candidates for the Colts. I think if it's not Josh McDaniels, Matt Nagy is probably the number one candidate. Who ends up in Arizona? I mentioned Mike Vrabel. I think he would be a candidate there. Pat Shurmur, I believe, is a strong candidate there. Do not rule out Todd Haley. Larry Fitzgerald staying in Arizona. I think he's thinking about it. More shakeups in the Giants front office. I think there could be a new number 2 coming in to work underneath Gettleman. Defensive coordinator choice in Baltimore. Obviously, there are some big names out there who've worked there in the past. Chuck Pagano is one. Vic Fangio is another. I still think the leader in the clubhouse is Wink Martindale. Would Pagano pick up I missed you. Ask me that again. Oh, McCarthy got an extension per ESPN. There it is. I did not see that. And I'm going to have to pull that up now. Colt McCoy, starter in D.C. next year. Oh, yeah, there it is. 1-year extension for Mike McCarthy through 2019. So that changes things a little bit. certainly changes things a little bit. Let's do some more here. Why would Belichick leave? If Belichick would leave, it would be because of I think if there's one thing that I think would make Belichick leave, it would be being overruled on a personnel decision. And so that's why I think the Garoppolo thing's just worth kind of keeping an eye on. Okay, let's go. More questions. Thanks for the update on McCarthy, by the way. Are the Seahawks imploding? No, but they've got major decisions to make. Cliff Averill, Cam Chancellor, are they going to continue to play football? Earl Thomas, Richard Sherman going into contract years. What do you do with them? Michael Bennett, he's older. What do you do with him? He already said he thinks he's done in Seattle. A lot of decisions to be made in Seattle. POB in Houston getting an extension. If they work out things with the front office situation, yes, I think he'll get an extension. Carlos Hyde to the Seahawks, good question. He's in a contract year. Jim Harbaugh to the Colts, I don't think so. I think Harbaugh is staying at Michigan. Let's do 10 more questions. Denver's next quarterback should be, let's go with Kirk Cousins. Number 2, what type of job would Saban leave Alabama for? The Giants job, maybe, and even then, I don't know if he'd want to work for a general manager. Number 3, what coaching changes could the Browns make? New offensive coordinator. Sean Ryan's been named the Houston quarterbacks coach who is out there. Number 4 is Josh Allen to Cleveland. Legit, I think, yes. At this point, I think all the quarterbacks are like, Josh Allen, Sam Darnold, Josh Rosen. I think that there's a legitimate chance that all of them wind up there in Cleveland. Number 5, Dom Capers, head coach. That doesn't count as a question. Let's not screw around with that one. Number 5, which college quarterback do you like for a Pats draft pick? Keep an eye on someone like Mason Rudolph, who could be available further down the line, 2nd, 3rd round pick potentially. Number 6, is there a worse person to lead a franchise than Bruce Allen? That's a loaded question. I do think that they could add to their personnel department. They really felt the loss of Scott McCloughan this year, and I think they'll continue to feel that loss. Number 7, why is there interest in John DeFilippo? Because DeFilippo has been intimately involved in designing that offense in Philadelphia. He's done a great job with Carson Wentz. He's been a coordinator before, and he's got the personality to be a head coach. So I think that he is someone that is certainly being given a look. If you want to look at trying to emulate what Sean McVay did or get something that's close to Sean McVay, I mean, Sean's special. Sean's a little different. But if you're looking for that model, Flip is somebody who you'd take a look at. Number 8, how many quarterbacks go in the top 10? I'm going to just say 3 right now. Darnold, Rosen, assuming they come out, and then either Mayfield or Allen. Number 9, does last night's game hurt Baker Mayfield's stock? Maybe a little. The second half wasn't pretty, but he looked great in the first half. It's a very good Georgia defense. He's going up against man coverage. Those guys were covered. I don't think it's going to kill him. Number 10, you think McDaniels would – okay, number 10, let's go with Quentin Nelson, a top 10 pick. Yes, Quentin Nelson is a top 10 pick. I believe that – and I guess we have more news coming here. Well, we'll see. Yes, Quentin Nelson is a top 10 pick, the best guard prospect to come out since Zach Martin. In fact, I've had people tell me he's a better guard prospect than Zach Martin, could wind up going in the top 5 picks, which is astounding for a guard. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. You guys know where to find me right here every Tuesday. We do it on Periscope, YouTube, and iTunes. Answer all your questions on Periscope every week right here. We want your feedback. Give me your feedback. You can hit me on my Twitter page at Albert Breer. You can hit me on my Facebook page at Albert R. Breer. You like it, and then you can message me. We've actually answered questions here from there the last couple of weeks. We want to know what you guys think so we can improve this. And always remember to listen to the MMQB 10 Things podcast, the MMQB podcast with Peter King. And this podcast, both YouTube and traditional editions, the MMQB podcast with Albert Breer. You can get us on Spotify, TuneIn, Stitcher, Google Play, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Same time next week, we'll be breaking down Wildcard Weekend and looking ahead to the division. See you guys then.